So since it's 7 o'clock, we're going to get this planning and zoning board meeting going today. Our let's see, we've got our invocation. So Wade, do you mind giving our invocation today?
Be glad. Our Father who is in heaven, we thank you for this beautiful day you've allowed us to wake up to and be a part of. We thank you for our health and our strength that you've given teaching us to come here to White Lake Planning Board meeting. And we ask, Father, that you lead us by your Holy Spirit and make good decisions and think through things that are good for not only the quality of the lake, but the people here who not only visit, but live here. And we just ask that you bless each and every one with a special blessing. We ask this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. All righty. The next item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. If everybody will stand if you can and address the flag. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All righty. The first item on our agenda is the approval of minutes from the January 6th planning board meeting, item 1A. If you like to make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Hope makes the motion. Wade seconds. Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Any discussion? Our next item on the agenda, number 2, is to nominate a new chair to the Planning and Zoning Board of the chair of the Planning and Zoning Board.
I would like to nominate Paul Norris, who, although he's not here, he has agreed to serve.
So Paul currently is sitting as the vice chair, and for the discussion, I think that would be appropriate. Do we have any other nominations? Let's take a vote on that. We have Hope, who has nominated Paul. Everybody in favor of that? You could say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any discussion? Oh, I'm sorry. We need a second for the nomination. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. The order.
He did agree. He did agree to serve.
Okay.
He did agree. He sent me an email
I
and
didn't do that dirty.
had a good conversation with me at Miss Pat's retirement ceremony actually, and said he would be more than happy to agree. And he felt like he was in a place where he had learned as vice chair, and I was looking forward to the opportunity if the board would nominate him and agree to that. So I can confirm that he did in fact agree, even though he's not here tonight.
Alrighty, so we had a nomination and a second. So sorry that I jumped the gun there, but let's vote again. Everybody in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Any discussion? All right, to item agenda number 3 is to fill a vacancy on the board. I assume that's to fill the vice chair, is that correct? Or do we have some other?
That's just to put.
That would be the vacancy for the seat.
See.
We will need a new vice chair. That's correct. And it's not on the agenda. We didn't know who would be nominated as chair, but we'll need a new vice chair, so we might have to address that. We can address that separately. This is to appoint a new, make a recommendation to the board of commissioners to appoint a new person to the planning to fill the vacancy left by Ms. Jordan.
Do we currently have folks still on the list that had initiated before in previous times that we could consult?
We do. We actually have 2 names. The first being Ms. Janae Pope, who's here in the audience today. Ms. Janae, would you like to address the board and tell them of your drawing a blank here, but if you want to address the board and just tell them why you'd be interested in serving, I think that'd be great.
Wait, hang on. Can you come to the microphone since it's going to be on the sorry.
My name is Janae Pope, and I moved here in 2021, but we've always had a place here since my children were really little. And so I have wanted to be a part of the community and help make a difference in everything. And so I think this is one way to do that. I'm planning on being here, not wanting to leave, so I want to be, a productive member of this society.
And the word I was looking for was your interest in joining the planning board. So I apologize for that slip up there, but thank you, Ms. Janae. And she is the first applicant. The planning board wants to consider her application.
I'll open up any for
Yeah.
discussion at the moment.
I'd go for her. I'll nominate her, however you want me to put it.
Yeah. Make a nomination, go for it.
I nominate Janae Pope.
To fill the vacancy, all right? We have a nomination, do we have a second?
Second.
Wait, there's a second. Everybody in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Any discussion on that? Our agenda item number 4, the Town of White Lake Stormwater Ordinance, item number 4A. I will turn it over to Sean to give us a.
Real quick, and I'm sorry, we're kind of all over the place tonight with the agenda and not having a chair or vice chair here tonight. And as a staff member, I know I speak for the board by saying I appreciate you jumping in and taking the lead here, Jonathan. Just as a suggestion, do we want to go ahead and nominate a vice chair and close that business out, or do you want to come back to that after the agenda? I'm sorry.
I mean, if people want to, do we have it?
I would
Well,
like to wait. Can we put it off to another meeting?
We certainly could table it.
I would like to table that. Just let's get Paul back here and unless someone else has a better or different idea about that. It was not on tonight's agenda and we can function through this next month until the next meeting comes up. That's my thought on it.
Sounds good to me.
and I agree. I think it's fine. We'll have the full board here. Miss Janae will be on the board at that time. As long as somebody's running the meeting, I don't think it's an item, like you say, it wasn't on the agenda and I don't think it's just a box to check off, I think.
Sure. All right. I'll step down here so everybody can see me and hear me a little bit better. I do want to just say before I get started that Lee Kane, our zoning administrator, is here tonight. If the board has any questions for him on any information related to this or not. I do want to point out he's here, and I appreciate you for being here, Lee, going through some of this conversation with us. Everybody get a chance to read our memorandum contained within the agenda packet? There's some dense material in there, to say the least. But I feel like it was important to show you this memorandum, to give you a chance to go through it, to give you a chance to come back to it after I make a presentation on it tonight. And then to give you a chance, of course, to reference this memorandum as we move forward throughout this process. I think there's a lot of good information in this memorandum. And I'm going to touch on some of those issues, not issues, but points tonight. As we move forward, I'll discuss what may be of importance moving down the road and what's of importance, now in the beginning of this process. But getting started with this, I just want to point out to you, the very beginning of this memorandum talks about White Lake. And that's important for you as a board to understand that White Lake, the town of White Lake, the town limits of White Lake is consisted of 1,732 acres, of which 1,200 acres are White Lake itself. But if you look at the ETJ, there are 5,000 acres of land that are under the purview of the zoning code of White Lake. And as we move forward with development at White Lake and what the future holds, so to speak, I think it's reasonable to expect some of these surrounding parcels in the ETJ to start becoming subject to development or some type of development application. And as we look at our zoning code, because again, ETJ falls under the purview of our zoning code, it's important to have the stormwater ordinance as a addition to the zoning code to help try and protect water quality, water clarity, and then of course, be good neighbors to existing property owners, protect property values and things of that nature. I want to continue by pointing out that the comprehensive plan that was put in place 2 or 3 years ago by the planning board, or recommended by the planning board to the Board of Commissioners and then adopted by the Board of Commissioners, highlights several action steps within the 20 or so action steps that are listed that include stormwater ordinance or stormwater control measures. And those are to adopt and enforce stormwater controls. The second one is to revise the current land use ordinance to help reduce impervious surfaces on or near the lake body and prevent, where possible, the increase of impervious surfaces in these same areas. The third being to revise the current land use ordinance to increase setbacks and increase minimum lot sizes to protect the lake body. The fourth action item being to develop a streetscape plan for White Lake Drive to improve aesthetics as well as to slow, absorb, and help clean stormwater. And you say, why does that matter? What type of context is the land use plan on those action items as it relates to our stormwater ordinance? Well, of course, the first one is self-explanatory to create a stormwater ordinance, but the other three tie in on how land is utilized. They tie in on the redevelopment or the infill, or potentially even the renovations to existing properties. And it gets you thinking along the lines, as we started off this presentation by discussing just how big the ETJ of White Lake is and how much land affects White Lake and the way water flows and of course runoff. And we're starting to see weather patterns now where we don't get rain where it rains all day and accumulates to an inch. We get rain for an hour that accumulates to 3 or 4 inches at a time. So being cognizant of that, and of course, being cognizant of all the impervious surfaces and roadways and concrete and asphalt and rooftops that are popping up inland in North Carolina, that's pushing water on us. Again, just trying to preserve and protect the clarity and quality of White Lake. That is our main goal as it relates to those land control action or land plan action items. So stormwater regulations in themselves can be defined as both structural and non-structural practices, where structural practices are requiring engineered stormwater measures that control and treat the stormwater runoff. Whereas non-structural practices focuses on protecting the existing natural resources and or utilizing zoning to minimize new imperviousness. So that would be something like a vegetative buffer. That's important because the applicability of stormwater regulations can be based on the area of disturbance, which is commonly referred to as the proposed built upon area, the BUA, which you'll see in this memo listed quite a lot. I really want to spend some time with the BUA and describing what it is to the planning board in this context, because the BUA really, again, the built upon area, really determines how the ordinance affects the proposed development, and then in turn how the ordinance accomplishes the goals of water runoff and controlling stormwater throughout the project development. You'll see that there's information in here listing municipalities of a certain size and how they're defined. In other words, we come back to our national pollutant discharge elimination system, municipal separate storm sewer. The MPDES MS4, simply put, a community with a dedicated stormwater system separate of a sewer system. You'll see that there are identifications in here that relate to the Coastal Area Management Act, that of course being CAMA. If you recall in one of our earlier conversations at the end of last year, one of the things that I stated to the board and still feel very strongly is that we fall neither under the CAMA Act, Coastal Area Management Act, or the MPDES 4 Permanent Act, meaning that we have the opportunity to take the best of both worlds here and try and relate that to White Lake so that we're not subject to the restrictions that especially CAMA applies on coastal communities, but we can benefit from some of the practices that are put in place that do have that accomplished effect of being positive overall. So again, I think we can take the good things and leave out the bad things as it relates, particularly to when we start talking about existing development. Everything we've mentioned so far is geared more at new development. Again, new development consisting of infill, renovations, or even development within our ETJ. So you'll see in the memo that there were several towns that were reviewed as part of re-review, which is, I understand, not a word, but you understand the point I'm trying to make. We started off by looking at Navassa, we looked at, Brunswick County, we looked at like Waccamaw, we looked at several communities in the past through a different project. And you see some of the same communities listed here, particularly like Waccamaw, with it being adjacent to a Carolina Bay and in our same geographic region. There is some information we can pull from. But I want to point out that Oak Island is listed in this review, and Oak Island, I think, actually has some very good stormwater control measures in place that we could actually utilize here at the lake in terms of they're trying to keep out, in my opinion, just from the brief review I've had over there, ordinance, they're concerned with their water quality in their canals, whereas we're concerned with water quality in our lake. Of course, they have to protect the ocean too, but I'm speaking specifically to the portions that affect their canals. So you'll see that there are several concepts, and I'm on page 3, that are consistent across all the municipalities that have been studied, and it goes in depth. I would encourage you to read through those. For the sake of time, I won't read through them all tonight, but these are all concepts that are shared across every municipality that was reviewed in part of this memorandum. In other words, I think it's reasonable to expect some of these same concepts popping up in our draft. And then there are several differences listed below that. So it all boils down to, in the comparative review, 4 different sections: the classified waters, the project density, the water quality treatment, and the vegetative buffers. There is a section on page 5 that discusses other stormwater regulations. I just want to say that this section highlights some of the feedback that the planning board has already given. In my opinion, and I thought this was a good addition by our engineering firm, these are unrealistic requests that were made as part of that original draft. And they've actually taken the time to tell you what was unrealistic. If there are any other municipalities that were reviewed, they'll share these, and you'll see Lake Waccamaw popping up quite a bit here. And then they've actually pointed out at the bottom that with the exception of the couple of times in Lake Waccamaw that these concepts pop up, they are not stated in any other model ordinance or model ordinances that were reviewed. In other words, we've reviewed Lake Waccamaw, but I would encourage you to put Lake Waccamaw to the side. I think that Lake Waccamaw has a lot of the challenges that we identified that we would be walking into with our draft that we reviewed previously when it comes to unrealistic expectations and a lack of buy-in in the community and requests that would either require so much staff time to ensure compliance or lead to numerous challenges by the public as we get into what you can and can't do on your property, the government telling you how to conduct your business, things of that nature. So I just bring that up as the end of the presentation to let you know that we are looking closely at these municipalities that we've looked at as part of formulating our new ordinance. However, we are cognizant of what's not working. We are cognizant of what did not work in the other draft, and we intend to bring forward a ordinance to you, hopefully next month, a draft ordinance to you next month that would omit these, but bring in suggestions of concepts that would be beneficial primarily on the new development side, the redevelopment side, as that's where the biggest opportunity is to have the greatest impact. But we are going to do our best to address in some way, shape, or form the existing property owners that are around the lake, because most of White Lake, as we've already mentioned in this presentation, is developed. So we've got to be cognizant of that as well. That's a challenge, but the engineer said earlier today, and I want to share this with you, that the goal here is to have the maximum effect possible as to what's reasonable on site, which I think is a very key statement to emphasize what's reasonable on site. Our goal is to bring forth an ordinance that our community can buy into, that the planning board can feel good about protecting our community moving forward, and that ultimately we can have success with implementing stormwater control measures and continue to relate this to other projects, as mentioned in the action item for Lumberton Council Government Plan, the streetscape project tying in the stormwater control measures, or any type of new development, potentially tying into things like curb and gutter and stormwater control measures to help keep water away and out of, at least runoff out of White Lake as much as possible. So having said that, I do also want to let the board know that I intend to, and we did discuss earlier today with the engineering firm, of how we could relate examples of this ordinance in effect to the planning board. I think that the planning board will get a lot of value out of hearing how this ordinance is going to affect you and your neighbors in specific places at White Lake, not just looking at a document and reading a text and trying to do your best to guess what that means. So I'm working with the engineering firm moving forward. In fact, I had a conversation with Public Works earlier about some existing problems that we know of, areas of the lake that may have poor drainage, areas of the lake that may have poor runoff, areas of the lake where water may be stagnant or water may be building up, so that we can in turn work with our engineering firm to try and address those areas within the ordinance. I should also state that most of the long-term effects for existing property are going to come through some sort of stormwater project. So I think it's important to separate those two ideas. The stormwater ordinance is not going to be a fix for the problems that we see today. It's not going to be an overnight fix for the problems that we see today. But the idea is, as we move forward in time, as development happens, as property changes hands, that every time that redevelopment or that new development or that infill is taking place, we're getting a little bit better. Our ability to maintain stormwater, our ability to control stormwater is getting a little bit better. And that is working hand to hand in conjunction with stormwater projects that are dedicated at building stormwater infrastructure to continue to move water away from the problems that we see at the lake now. So having said that, I know that was a lot. And like I said, the memo is a dense memo, but I would encourage you to read through it and maybe reread through it after our conversation tonight. I want to point out that the last 3 pages are tables, and I think it does a great job of breaking down each review municipality, the regulations, the applicability, the stormwater control measure designs, the water quality designs, the vegetative buffers, et cetera, et cetera. So the tables tie in the peer-reviewed municipalities into the text that you find in the memorandum, if you follow along with that statement. So having said that, I'm more than happy to answer any questions from the planning board if there are any. Again, looking forward to bringing forward an ordinance draft for your review with feedback and your opportunity to discuss at that time with our engineers on the draft ordinance.
So we'll open up for discussion for the board. Sean, can you talk a little bit about the availability of grants and the need for the stormwater ordinance for that?
Sure. Sure. So actually, there's 2 things I'll say here. Earlier today, we're actually talking about stormwater acquisition grants, which would be acquiring property or acquiring competitive loss property potentially, and creating stormwater control measures on that. If you recall, our stormwater ordinance, our stormwater project that took place before the stormwater ordinance, we had 2 projects listed as part of a stormwater plan on White Lake Drive. One of those was more of a sports complex idea. The other was like a stormwater park idea. So the grant that I just spoke to, the stormwater acquisition grant, would be something that could potentially be a beautification project, turns into a stormwater park, that turns into a stormwater control measure for our community. Potentially having things like a multi-use path in there, or some number of flower gardens or things of that nature. But trying to work with within the bounds of what's allowed, but get maximum value out of that type of thing. The other thing I would say is, much like a asset management plan or a capital improvement project or capital improvement plan, for a wastewater project or a water project, we do and will receive points on scoring the criteria for grant applications geared to stormwater by having a dedicated stormwater ordinance in place.
Any other questions on the board? Wade?
Yes, I'd like to, just to ask, the clearing that's taking place before you get to Carolina Avenue off to the right of White Lake Drive, that's a large clearing. Is that part of this plan of bringing something new?
Sure. As of now, I understand that to be a county project. The town does not have any permits or any type of request made for that land specifically. But that's not to say that something couldn't come about in the future. Any type of county development, for instance, would require, because it is an ETJ, would require a zoning permit, would require a permitting process for whatever that intended use would be.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, because what part is White Lake versus ETJ?
A very small portion. Like it's basically what runs along White Lake Drive there, and everything behind it is actually an ETJ.
Okay.
Which is available on GIS if you want
Yes.
to look at that, but
Okay.
again, we've received no plans, no permit requests, but anything like that is going to run through the planning board as part of the process.
Okay, thank you.
And at that point, you would have the opportunity, or any of the planning board members have the opportunity to make recommendations, make suggestions, just depending on what the application would be or could be.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Sure.
Do we also have, with the White Lake Watch things, and lots of research has gone into the town and all, for maps as far as where the fall is of, because again, having a stormwater ordinance, our ultimate goal for the water quality of White Lake, if water is within the town limits, but then it goes away from the lake, is there going to be a differentiation between, because the ultimate goal would be to keep White Lake clear, but if it runs away from it, it's kind of like, all right, well, it runs away from it already. You know what I mean? Like, so just to say, do we have maps that kind of give on this side of White Lake Drive, it drains away from White Lake, and therefore, blah, 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 these terms, rules will apply. Anything that's on whatever, you know what I mean? Like, just White Lake's kind of crazy. Like you
Sure.
said, there's low areas, there's stuff that goes this way, there's stuff that goes that way. It's kind of like, where does it go?
Absolutely. Some stuff that runs right down the middle of that. So we do have some of that information available as part of our land use plan. We did a lake management addendum plan that does have a portion of that. That is a hydrogeological study that was conducted by hydrologists. There is some information contained within that. But certainly as we work on the stormwater projects, moving forward, post stormwater draft development or implementation, that can be something that's continually looking at. Dare I say the solution to pollution is dilution. So if we can send it to the wetlands, it seems to make sense to do that. But of course, water is going to go to its lowest area, and water does not flow upstream. So we want to be cognizant of those things as we look at a stormwater control system or a stormwater infrastructure system to make sure we're getting our maximum benefit out of that.
My other comment, based on, reading the ordinance, the draft ordinance that we had like a year and a half ago, whatever it was, like, and again, it was just a draft, just to kind of say, hey, here's something that could be like this. One of my biggest things that I've asked before was, the development around the lake, and I've gone to GIS and looked in, there's basically like, I'd say 15 lots, maybe that's not developed around White Lake. And it seems like every parcel around the lake is developed in has some sort of structure or house or something like that on there. And so it's really a new development, maybe on the northwestern side of the lake. There's some areas there for, stuff. The vegetative buffer, one of the things for me is, 5 foot is not a whole lot of a buffer. But given that we have lot sizes like at Timber Lodge Village, I mean, literally some of the lots are like 80 foot wide. And if you do 50-foot set off, you'd have 30 feet to build a house, but then no set off for the street side. You know what I mean? So I don't know that the increasing the buffer is going to work since we have all this development. And again, one of my biggest worries for the plan would be the new development versus old development. If you tear down the house, it becomes that new development, but then with the set off restrictions and all, it's like you really can't build anything there anyway. So one of my thoughts was that it's almost just kind of like a tax. And I know nobody likes that word, but just to say, like, if you have a durable surface, because again, Durham does this, but basically it says square footage of your roof, you've got so much rainfall that comes off, we're going to tax you on your permeable surface, and whatever that tax rate is. But it's just to say that if you are contributing to stormwater, right, then you should kind of help pay for it. You know what I mean? And people that have an empty lot that there is no structure, then they basically don't pay for it, you know. But given that, it's like all of White Lake is developed. So, but just to say that would help us give some funds or something to do a clarity project, and you would be directly giving towards your unpermeable structure, kind of thing. Oh, and then the buffer. I know I'm talking about a bunch of stuff. I'll let you talk in here in a second. The buffer, the biggest thing for me is like the cypress trees around the lake. You know, the cypress trees are protected up to the state's mean high water mark. The problem that happens sometimes is that the shore kind of comes and goes, ebbs and flows. One of the things that I would like to see, never mind a vegetative buffer, because it's kind of like broad. I would definitely like some protections for our cypress trees to say, you know, it's one of our iconic things for White Lake is the cypress trees, clear water, sunsets, you know, kind of thing. But I would like to put in the stormwater or somehow to specify native plants, you know, and to go into cypress trees are native, we want to keep those, and, you know, have to like specifically list what it is. Because honestly, we don't need a bunch of holly bushes to be our vegetative buffer. Not that anybody would do that, but just say, you know, we got to be pretty specific if we're gonna do whatever. I know I've talked a bunch, so I don't know if you want to say.
I think everything you just said is a great example of why a cookie cutter plan doesn't work.
Yeah.
And as it relates to Lake Waccamaw, I'm sure what they have works well for them, but that's why I would encourage you to steer away from that. Maybe look at it in context of a Carolina Bay community, but again, a cookie cutter plan is just not going to work well for us long term. Some of the things I will say that you touched on are probably going to be more applicable in like a stormwater control manual versus a stormwater ordinance, but that's another conversation for another day. One thing I will say is we have begun exploring an incentive program, which may be the opposite of fee, but it's in that fee conversation of how we encourage buy-in and how we make it worthwhile for our residents to get in the stormwater control business. So we're taking all this into effect. We're doing some research on a number of different things, but I'm happy to jot down some of those requests you made, and where it's feasible, work in, certainly try working.
My other thought, you know, the vegetative buffer is supposed to protect, you know, it says in here, prevent erosion, help with water clarity, and, you know, something else. Our beach areas, you know, Miss Hope's here. We've got Camp Clearwater that's got a big beach area. I've got a big beach area across the street here. Golson's has a big beach area. These are places that tourists are going to come. It's not really feasible to do a vegetative buffer 5 feet from the shoreline. Because basically you want to play in the sand, you know, build sand castles and all that kind of stuff. So I would like to kind of carve out some sort of thing also to talk about beach areas, even for people in their houses and stuff. You know, kind of say like, if there is a beach area, that's what it is, you know, and then it's a little bit different. And again, it's really hard because when you look, if you've ever walked across the shoreline and stuff, and many people have, I mean, it is like pick a house, pick a piece of property. It is totally different, just like you're saying, and it's kind of hard to do a Mont Blanc rule for everybody. But of course, we've got to start somewhere. But I just don't want people to get mad to be like, if we make a rule, I really want us to really kind of discuss it because, you know, we don't need a full house. I mean, it's always nice when people come, but you know what I mean? Like, I don't want people being all up in arms and be like, what were y'all thinking? Like, oh my God, this is the stupidest rule in the world. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I'm getting to.
So we want to be proactive there too, because we've got to enforce it. I mean, there's got to be some type of compliance side of this. So of course, we're not looking to make some unrealistic expectation, as you may have seen from the previous draft, where that we can't comply with it, we can't enforce. I mean, how can we ask somebody to do something like that? So of course, we're taking into context, but the one thing I would say to the point you made is there's going to be some differences between commercial and residential. And of course, we're going to protect, you know, the tourist areas and areas of natural beach, and we want to keep those looking beautiful and utilized. And I just think it's realistic to establish different requests, different control measures, different concepts based on the usage of the parcel.
Yeah, my last comment is the verbiage and definitions, which, you know, I've kind of talked about before. But if the North Carolina Administration Code has an impervious surface definition, I know that in our, not necessarily planning and zoning board stuff, but White Lake in general has different definitions of what is impervious. Marl versus rock versus clay versus sand versus whatever, you know. So again, you know, the definition section, I think, have those the people that we're working with, Withers and Ravenel, really kind of hammer down so that way we're all on the same board of like what, you know, so that way we're looking at North Carolina law, we're looking at town of White Lake, you know, to kind of be on the same page. Because it's very hard to try to be in compliance if everybody's calling something different.
And most of that North Carolina law is going to be applicable for disturbing greater than an acre. So mostly on the lake, I don't think we're going to come into too much of that, but that's what we're seeing.
That's all I have. Anybody else? All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. Lee, do you have any feedback to give while we're here? Okay. All right.
Study and look over everything. I'm trying to take it all. It's gonna be a full-time job, somebody takes care of this.
Yeah. Any other business for agenda item number 5 is other business. Does the board have any other business they'd like to bring up today? If not, we will go to item number 6, which is open forum. It's 3 minutes per citizen. And if you will, please state the name and address of your information. If there's nobody today, for open forum, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Hope. And do I have a second? Sarah, speaking on We have a second. Everybody in favor, say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? Sound like one. All right, thank you.